Well, welcome back. It's been a minute since I've done an episode, but I'm back with my brother Bracken today. He's going to be a more, I think, consistent and frequent guest on here. So excited to have him on here. But today, me and Bracken, we're going to talk about a pretty cool dude, a guy that really Bracken introduced me to, and that's Dick Winters, World War II hero. Bracken, I guess, where did you first hear about him? Was it the series? Where did you first start learning about Dick?
I think I first learned about him. I was just interested in World War II stuff and books and stuff, and I came across his book, Beyond Band of Brothers, which is basically the story of Band of Brothers, but his recollection and his memoirs. So I listened to that before I even watched the series or anything. I wasn't really I had heard of the series, but I wasn't really familiar with it. So I listened to his book, and I really liked his book, really liked who he was, his leadership style and principles and his character. So after I read the book, I watched the series since and stuff and learned a lot more about him, but I think that's kind of was my first introduction, or where I first heard of him and learned of him.
Yeah. So that's probably where, if anybody that's watching or listening's heard about him, it's probably from the series Band of Brothers, which you can watch it on Netflix, and I'd really encourage you to watch that. Gives you a good idea of what that generation, those men, went through in World War II, and gives you a greater appreciation for it. So let's dive into talking about Dick Winters. I guess who he was, where he came from. I guess who was he? I mean, what was he like? How did he end up where he ended up?
So yeah, he was born in Pennsylvania. He went grew up in Pennsylvania. I think his mom was a Quaker.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Or well, I can't remember exactly, but something similar to that. So I grew up religious, went to Franklin and Marshall College, and then he actually joined the Army in 1941. Prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, he enlisted, and then obviously,
Okay.
in December 41, everything changed, and that's kind of where he went from there. So, and then
Okay, so he'd been kind of one of these guys. He enlisted before the U.S. got involved in the war, but I think a lot of people could kind of see the writing on the wall that eventually, sooner or later, we probably were going to be thrown into this war. So
yeah.
I think that's why you probably saw a lot of young men starting to join at that point.
Yeah, and he was in the
Okay, so
ROTC at Franklin and Marshall. I think it was fairly common too at the time for young men to enlist and sometimes serving in the military. So I don't think he at all expected to end up where he ended up doing what he was doing. But
yeah,
that's kind of just a brief synopsis of his upbringing.
okay. So nothing, I guess, out of the ordinary or extraordinary at that point in his life. And so Pearl Harbor happens. The United States is thrust into World War II. So from this point, where does he go? How does he end up? We know he ends up in Europe, but where does he end up? I guess I'm assuming he went to basic training after this, or he'd probably done basic training, but he went to be a paratrooper, correct?
Right. So first he went to, I don't know if it's called the same thing then, but like officer candidate school, basically, where he was in the military, then he went and he became an officer, did some extra training and schooling to become an officer, and then decided he wanted to be in the paratroopers. I think it was kind of a new concept, and he saw what other paratroopers did, and he just had a standard of excellence, and I think he realized that those were top-notch guys and fighters, and so he wanted to be the best that he could be. So he decided he wanted to be a paratrooper. So then he went and trained actually with Easy Company in Georgia at Camp Toccoa. That's kind of where his company, Easy Company, which Band of Brothers is based off that company. That's kind of where they first were assembled, was Camp Toccoa, where they went through some pretty extensive, rigorous training under Sobel.
Yeah.
So if you've watched the series, there's a pretty contentious, I don't know, contentious, but Sobel's not viewed well in the eyes of Winters or any of the other people from Easy Company. He was kind of a dictator. I think Dick Winters said he led by fear rather than by example. Just more punishing guys. They couldn't pass any inspections, and then they would be punished. They had to, spend long hours doing physical training. They would go run a mountain called Currahee. I think it was like a 6-mile run to the top of the mountain and back, and he would make them go run Currahee or do all sorts of like midnight rucks or trainings, just all sorts of stuff that the other companies didn't have to do. And so I think more for his leadership style, they didn't love Sobel, and Dick Winters wasn't an exception to that. He didn't love him as well. But it's interesting, like if you read his book or you listen to his interviews, he always gives Sobel credit for Easy Company, for their brotherhood, as well as just their, I think, competence in battle, their physical preparation. He does give Sobel credit. Like, they bonded because they had to under Sobel, right? Like, they bonded with each other. And Sobel, like, was kind of this almost dictator type leader, but then when it came to their trainings and stuff, he was almost incompetent. He couldn't navigate or read maps, or he would, in their trainings, he would get them in trouble. So I think a lot of them were nervous to go to battle under his leadership. But interesting. I think it's just kind of who Dick Winters is. He always looks back and gives Sobel credit for them becoming who they did become.
Yeah, well, I'm sure all those, you think about it, all those extra trainings that he made them do that none of the other companies were having to do. In the long run, I'm sure that benefited them so much. But one interesting story about Sobel and Winters is there's a story where Winters is supposed to go and inspect, I think, the latrines that his men are supposed to clean. And at the last minute, Sobel changes the time that Winters is supposed to come inspect it, and he claims that he called Winters, but the cabin that Winters was staying in didn't have a phone. Mm-hmm. And he claims he sent a message, but Winters said no message ever got to him. So he reprimands Winters, and he punishes him. I forget the exact punishment. Basically, he had a choice. You can either take this punishment, it was something where he had to stay there over the weekend and do some kind of a duty, or he could go to court-martial.
Yeah.
So I think was just viewing it as
right. He was trying.
It's a way for him to look like he has power and authority over him. Yeah. And Winters is obviously going to take this, tedious little task that he has to do over a court-martial. But Dick Winters says, okay, I'll go to court-martial then. And I think that probably set Sobel back a little bit, because he clearly, I think, knew that he was probably in the wrong there. But I think that shows a little bit of Winters' style as well, that leadership and that bravery that he had. Yeah. Anyways, I thought that was an interesting story, and I read about that one too. And it was pretty accurate, the way it was portrayed in Band of Brothers to what happened in real life.
Yeah, what he writes about as well. I think part of it too is like just thinking about that situation, like almost this petty little thing. But Winters says, "All right, well, I'll court-martial." One, I think it was kind of it hit the spear, the head of the spear. Like he had enough. But also, I think Dick Winters took a lot of pride in who he was and his character and his preparation and his responsible, like his, dependability. And so when Sobel is claiming, hey, I told you this and you didn't respond, or you weren't in time, or you were late, that may be like, I think maybe Winters hit a point of like, hey, no, that's not me, that's not my style, and I'm going to stand up for myself because I know that I was in the right. I obeyed orders. Yeah. And you're twisting things to make me look like, to maybe take a hit on my character, right? And I don't think he was interested in that. So he did have a self-confidence, just like stand up for himself in certain situations.
Yeah, and ultimately, like you'd mentioned, just in trainings, they'd started to see that Sobel just was not up to the task. He's making all sorts of blunders and mistakes in trainings, and his own Easy Company actually rises up and basically goes to what do they call it? Mutiny. That's what they call it, I think.
Yeah, which is like a big risk that they took. they could get kicked out. Like they could, like there was some heavy punishment associated with that. But I think they all realized at this time too, when this happened, Winters wasn't with Easy Company because of the court martial. He was at that time they'd moved him to another company while they're were working through that court martial stuff. So I think they saw Winters wasn't in their company. They were under the leadership of Sobel. They were preparing for the D-Day invasion. I don't know if they really knew what that full mission was at that point, but they knew that they were going into combat soon. And I think that they weighed their risks, and they were willing to take that chance rather than go to battle under the Sobel's leadership.
Yeah. I think they knew that their likelihood of dying in battle was higher with Sobel at the command.
Right.
So that was. I mean, you talk about, I guess, guts and courage. That was pretty insane. That all those sergeants rose up and went and basically tried to oust him, and it ended up working. It ended up getting him out.
It ended up working. Luckily, I don't know why I forget his name, but the battalion commander basically was like, assess this situation. Obviously, they got reprimanded, but ultimately, I think he saw, what was best as well, and so Sobel was removed from command over Easy Company, and
right.
Yeah.
So I guess at this point, what happens with the court martial, as well as how does Dick Winters end up back with Easy Company?
That's a good question. I'm trying to reflect exactly what happened. I mean, I think the court-martialing, he wasn't guilty of what Sobel said he was.
Cleared of.
Yeah, he was cleared, so he was able to go back to Easy Company, which, he talks highly of Easy Company and just being able to be with Easy Company. And when he wasn't with them, he felt that separation, like they were his boys, his brothers. So he was back with Easy Company as an officer. He wasn't in command of Easy Company at that point, but he was back with Easy Company as an officer and able to jump with them on D-Day.
Yeah. So is that kind of, I guess that's kind of the first action. That is the first action the Easy Company sees, correct? Is the jump at D-Day.
Yeah, and before that, like, I kind of want to go back. There's a couple things about Dick Winters and just who he was. Like, obviously, he did awesome things in battle, and he's a war hero. But I think some things while he was in England and while they were training and preparing, I think there's some things about just who Dick Winters was that allowed him to be the leader in battle that he became. So when he was in England, he got really close with this family in England that housed him. He lived with them. It was basically his second family. I mean, he would live with them, go to church with them, all of those things. But even when a lot of the guys, would get leave and be able to go into town, go out for a night or whatever, Winters just talked about how he wanted to be home with this family. Like, I think he was kind of a homebody, wanted to be home with them. He would always be studying, preparing, reading his battle manuals, and making sure that he knew and understood everything in them. So his preparation was so key, even prior to them, going to this goes back to before they even went to England, when he was at Toccoa. Everything leading up to this, he was just so focused on his preparation and so intense on his preparation. I think that allowed him to be the leader that he was under high pressure, because he was just so prepared that it just, like, he didn't have to second think about things. He just completely prepared himself. He would go out for runs, like every morning. His morning routine would go out for a run every single day. He talks about one of the key principles of leadership, especially combat leadership, is physical fitness. Because once your body tires, your mind starts to tire, and it's hard to stay mentally aware and mentally strong, and when your body is tired and when you're fatigued. So his physical preparation, his intellectual preparation, everything, he just prepared himself so much that I think when he got into the heat of battle or high pressure situations, he was able to perform under pressure. Yeah,
that reminds me of me and Bracken both grew up wrestling, and on the WWII wrestling door, Coach Warren, for I don't know how many years, that poster, it was a poster board that he just wrote it on, but it was that quote, "The will to win means nothing without the will to prepare. Makes me think of that. Just very detail oriented. It sounds like Winters was.
Mm-hmm.
He knew his preparation ultimately was going to be probably the difference between life and death.
Yeah, for him.
Strategically as well as physically, it sounds like.
Yeah. And I think it weighed more on him, life and death for himself, but even more so for his men and the men around him.
Yeah.
Like, he did not want to let anyone down or anyone to die or casualties to happen because of his lack of preparation. Obviously, it did happen, lots of casualties, but I don't think he wanted that to happen because of his lack of preparation. So he was
Right.
very diligent in preparation in all aspects.
Yeah. And that's I mean, you can go and read about a bunch of the different soldiers that were in Easy Company, and I mean, all of those guys had the utmost respect as well as trust in Winters, and a lot of that goes back to obviously the bond they, I think, shared and created when they were under Sobel. But I'm sure that preparation that he put into it, that didn't go unseen, and that probably played a big part into the trust that was given to him from the other members of Easy Company.
Yeah.
So he's in England. He spends a lot of time with his family. I guess anything else in England that's that we want to talk about, or do we shift over? I guess the next big significant thing is it
Yeah.
D-Day, or am I jumping to the gun? What?
No, I think that's the next big one was D-Day. I just want to talk about England, and that was something that impressed me. Just as you learn more about who he was, I think that was a big attribute that he had that I think led to a lot of success later. But yeah, so the next June 6, 1944, right? D-Day.
Yep.
So the paratrooper, their mission was to jump behind enemy lines prior to the land invasion and basically secure some key points, take out some German defense that was right on there on the coastline to allow for the invasion to take place. So they flew in that night to jump behind enemy lines, basically into France. I don't know, any story I hear about the guys who participated in the invasion of Normandy on D-Day is just, I always think about like what was that trip over there like? Like Winters talks about. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, well, before we jump into that, I'd love to actually let's watch the clip from Band of Brothers, their jump on D-Day.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool. I don't think that still gives it justice. I mean, I think about even before, like loading into those planes, getting prepped. They know what their mission is now. They know that. I mean, this is the largest amphibious invasion in history, basically, right? They know they're going to face the Germans head on in their own territory. Like it's just what goes through their mind and I don't know, the mental strength, what these guys had to be able to go do that. Like I try to put myself in the shoes. It's like, God, I would just be like frozen in fear, crying. Like, but these guys just had some intestinal fortitude. Maybe is the right word. I don't know, but they did it. They did it, right?
Yeah, you can't help but have when you watch that, I think it's, if you watch the whole series up to that point, it brings even more emotion to it. But I mean, you can't watch that and just think, man, like what more do I have to give?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you see what they're doing right there. They're jumping in the dark, and there's, bullets all around them, planes going down all around them, and it's jump out, and then making it to the ground alive is just the beginning.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I mean, so let's dive into that. So
yeah. So they're
what then happens? They get to the ground.
Well, yeah, they're flying over there. So Winters was, I think, the jump man. So basically, he's looking out the door, and there's just planes as far as you can see. As they're going across the English Channel, you look down, and there's just ships as far as you can see. And then once they hit land, the anti-aircraft fire starts shooting, and I mean, like that clip shows, it's just pure chaos. There's planes going down around them, exploding. There's rounds coming through the plane. I think a lot of the guys, once they hit that point, they wanted to get out of the plane rather than be in the plane at that point. So it was just pure chaos. And because of the chaos of it all, a couple things happened. One, they missed their drop zone pretty significantly. So it means they're going to land in a place that they aren't prepared to land in or maybe as familiar with. And then they're also just going quite a bit faster than what they trained. So that's going to make a big difference when they jump, and the force that hits them as they jump, and the propeller force and everything. So when they jump with a leg bag, which is a heavy bag that has all their supplies and ammunition, weapons, everything that they're going to need. And a lot of them, when they jumped, because they were going faster than expected, the force of the jump ripped the leg bag right off. So for Winters, he jumps, his leg bag rips off, he lands, he's not able to find his leg bag, he's behind enemy lines at this point. He doesn't have a weapon other than a knife that he had stuck in his boot. And he's by himself, doesn't know where he is because they've missed their drop zone. So just in Nazi-occupied France, basically by himself, in the dark, unarmed. And it's just interesting to listen to him talk about it, and just, I think one of his attributes is he was just able to remain calm in these situations. So he lands, he's just like assesses, like, okay, what do I need to do now? He's not able to find his leg bag, but he does find another paratrooper who does have a gun, and they hear machine gun kind of off in the distance, so they don't want to go that way. So he says, okay, let's go this way. And wants that other paratrooper to take the lead. He's armed. He has his weapon. And then this guy's too scared to take the lead. So Winters, and the leader that he is, says, all right, and he just grabs his knife, says, all right, follow me. And so he takes the lead. They got to figure out where they're at so that they can get to their objective, right? So he takes the leads this paratrooper. Eventually they come across, some other paratroopers as well, and a sign of the town that they were in. I think it was St. Mary Glisse. So they see the sign. They're able to, and then he pulls out his map. He's able to locate where they're at and where they need to go, and basically leads these men until they're able to meet up with, a larger group of paratroopers and get to where they need to be. But I think that's one of the first examples of just his able to stay calm in complete chaos. And then in that situation, how many guys are just going to freeze in fear or not know what to do, unarmed, behind enemy lines, have to locate yourself and then figure out where you need to go. And he was able to do that and kind of take the lead and take kind of the leadership approach of like, all right, follow me, we'll figure it out. I'll take the lead, we'll figure it out, until they're able to get to where they needed to be.
So the strategy was, though, the paratroopers flew over top, and they dropped behind German lines.
Right.
And then it was the next morning when all the ships came on the beaches of Normandy.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah. So the strategy, obviously, these paratroopers come behind enemy lines, are able to engage the Nazis and take out some of their defense, because they had a pretty strong defense right there on the shoreline guarding these beaches, Utah Beach, Omaha Beach. So, yeah, paratroopers kind of try to relieve some of that defense and get the Germans from behind. So that was the strategy, and it was more chaos, I think, than obviously they had trained for, but they were
Yeah.
able to get to where they needed to be.
So, at what point does Winters take command of Easy Company? Is it basically right here,
It's
or is it
it's
further down the road?
basically as soon as he lands in Normandy, he's in command of Easy Company, because the company commander, as well as some other senior officers, their plane went down as they were flying over. They went down, they all died in that crash, and so as soon as Winters hits the ground, he's second in command. So he's takes command of Easy Company at that point. So once they all are able to kind of rally and get to where they need to be, then he's in command of Easy Company, and at that point, he leads an assault on some German batteries that are firing down on Utah Beach. They're causing quite a bit of destruction. It's the assault at Bracken Manor is what it's called. Yeah, they had some batteries set up in some trenches and stuff, and some hedgerows in some fields at Bracken Manor there in Normandy. And so Winters and his men were assigned the task of basically taking out those batteries to allow that invasion on Utah Beach.
So they're pretty influential in that, I guess, that victory there on Utah Beach. And in Normandy, obviously we had so many soldiers that died at Normandy. But ultimately, it does end up being a victory in a sense. We kind of break the lines of the
Yep.
Germans, and we're able to start marching in. So from D-Day, then I guess what is Easy Company's job from this point on? They've broken the German lines. They help win Utah Beach. At this point, what is it? Are they supposed to just march further into France? What do they do?
Yeah, so I think they're on the front lines for a little while longer after D-Day, and they have another jump into Holland on Operation Market Garden, and so they jump into Holland on another mission there, where they are on the front lines for some significant time there. And I think this is another situation where Winters one of the assaults that he's known for. So for the assault at Bracken Manor became famous, and Winters' strategy basically of taking over those three German batteries. That's taught. That's kind of textbook strategy now, and taught at West Point. And so
Is this where they had they were outnumbered, right? They were.
Well, so Bracken Manor was on D-Day, which they were outnumbered there, but that's where he takes out the German batteries and is able to give some relief on Utah Beach. So, but then in Operation Market Garden, so the Crossroads ambush is what it was, and they were outnumbered. So
Hold on
they
there.
basically
I lost you.
You
I
hear me?
lost you for a second there. Yeah,
Okay.
now I can hear you.
Yeah, so Operation Market Garden, the Crossroads ambush, they were outnumbered, and basically they found a German company, or I guess setting up a defense against the Americans who were trying to advance. And so I think Winters had 13 men, and he leads an ambush basically on this German defense, and he beats them by surprise. He just surprise attacks them. So he flanks the defense. They're in a field flanking where he sees these Germans setting up, and he basically puts together a plan to ambush them with these 13 other men that he's with. And so I think it was 50 plus Germans. And so they make this plan, they flank them, Germans don't know they're there, and then when it's time to charge, basically, him and these 13 other men are supposed to get up and charge across this open field and then surprise these Germans and take them out. And so when they say go, Winters jumps up and starts going, and I think only 4 or 5 of the other guys start going. The other guys kind of hesitate for a minute. I don't know if it's fear or what it is. They hesitate for a minute, but Winters just keeps going, and he's out there just sprinting across this field to ambush these Germans. and he realizes that he's all alone. Like, he's just out there by himself, just running, and I don't know if the other guys couldn't keep up. Like, this is a testament to his physical training. Like, he's just out there running, and he said everything kind of just slowed down. And he said it was a very lonely feeling, but everything slowed down, and he's able to run and gets to the Germans, and he sees one German who's kind of stepped away from the company, and he surprises this German kid. He says it's basically a boy, and the German looks at him, and then Winters just looks at him for a second, and time kind of slows down, and then he shoots that German, and then kind of just mows down this company of Germans, and the rest of Winters' company kind of catches up, and they're able to kill or capture this company of Germans in an ambush at the crossroads. So just another example of his leadership. Not only was he a great leader, he could stay calm, he could say follow me, but like, he could execute. And I think his men really respected, like, he could walk the walk, right? Like, he's out there leading the way, leading this charge as the men are trying to keep up. But he just,
So he's just kind of one of those, I think, natural born leaders. People just gravitate towards him, and it's not because he's loud or wanting that mantle of leadership.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of naturally the way he is. I think he kind of quietly leads by example.
Right.
He's not super out there.
Is
there anybody? Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I was actually talking to one of my friends at work about this today. He's listening to Beyond Band of Brothers right now, and he talked about a quote that he liked from Winters in the book about this, and I won't get it word for word, but basically he said, one of the keys to leadership is to gain the respect of your men, not by your rank, but by being a man. So basically,
cool.
He was the man in that situation. Like, this is what needs to be done. We're going to do it, and I'm going to get it done, and I'm prepared, and I'm going to lead the way. And his men respected him for that and were willing to follow him.
Is there anybody, I guess, in modern times, like today, that you would maybe compare to Winters' leadership style?
That's a good question. That kind of puts me on the spot. I'd have to think about it. I think about immediately what came to mind, and maybe it's like you mentioned our wrestling background, but I think about, the coach for Penn State, who's powerhouse wrestling team right now, is Cael Sanderson, who was, the greatest collegiate wrestler of all time himself. So obviously people respect him for that. But if you listen to any of his wrestlers now, him as a coach, he's just is there for them and does anything for them. He stays out of the spotlight. He's not in it for himself, but they'll say, like, if they're trying to lose weight, before weigh-ins one night and they got to go ride the bike or do a workout, they're like, he's right there next to us doing the workout. Or if, they're out there taking our dirty clothes and doing our laundry so we have clean clothes for the next day when we need to compete, so that we don't have to worry about that. So I think that's kind of similar. Like, Winters he didn't want to be in the spotlight. He wasn't worried about the rank or anything like that. He just wanted to be the best that he could for his men, and he wanted his men to be the best that they could. So I don't know if that really correlates. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Obviously, that's not probably like the most well-known or prominent leader if you're in the wrestling world.
Yeah, I think
obviously he is. But
I think it's a great example, though. So for anybody that doesn't know, Cael Sanderson is, you should look him up. So at this point, I know Bastogne is a big part of Easy Company's journey here. Mm-hmm. At what point do they get to Bastogne, which is basically the backwoods of France, correct?
Yeah. Yep, it's the Battle of the Bulge. So you've probably heard of that. But basically, this was like Hitler's last-ditch effort. Like, well, they're advancing. It's kind of imminent now. Let's see if we can stop them. And he launches a massive attack on the U.S. advance at the Battle of the Bulge. And Easy Company gets put basically on the front lines to hold the line at the Battle of the Bulge. This is in December of 1944. So it gets super cold, freezing cold conditions. Freezing. They're living in foxholes. German mortars would come in and it would basically explode. They're in a forest, so explode the trees above them, and a lot of the danger was basically these trees falling on them, and German mortars. And so they held the line, I don't remember how many days, over 30 days of holding the line in these freezing cold conditions, and just terrible, terrible conditions. And Easy Company was a big part of that. And we talk a lot about Easy Company in this podcast, obviously, and Dick Winters. They get a lot of credit. They get a lot of notoriety now because Steve Ambrose's book Band of Brothers, and then the HBO miniseries Band of Brothers, and a lot of people know about them, and they're credited
Right.
with this just playing a huge role in the European theater. But I think about too, like, there's so many other companies and soldiers and men who did so much that aren't like in the spotlight. So I think Easy Company, while they were great and incredible at what they did, I think they kind of represent as a whole just everything that these World War II soldiers went through. So we talk about Easy Company and what they did, but there were so many other companies and men that did so much that will never be heard of or receive the notoriety or publicity that they should. It's just Easy Company did a lot, and then their story got out there. Yeah, they held the line at Bastogne, Battle of the Bulge. A lot of casualties there, and just miserable, miserable conditions. Just freezing cold, living in foxholes. So they spent Christmas there in 1944. And at this time, Winters, he was not on the front lines. He was, because he wasn't leading in command of Easy Company at this point. He was a battalion, I don't remember his exact title, but basically he was kind of under the battalion commander at this point. So he wasn't in direct lead of Easy Company. So he says he was like 75 yards off the front line, which you would think isn't that far, but if you listen to him and other men, like, that was a significant difference from being right on the front line to that distance beyond the front lines.
Yeah.
But his goal really was trying to keep the morale of these men up, and talking with them and being with them. And he even talks about going back to his discipline. He talks about, like, one thing that he would just do every day. Discipline was he would shave every day, which in combat, especially in those conditions, that's probably not common, right? But he would get up every morning, freezing cold, and he would shave. And he talks about too how that kind of, in his mind, trying to relay to his men or portray, like, hey, this isn't as bad as you think. Like, we're still shaving every day. Like, we're doing okay.
Yeah.
So, but he wasn't on the front line at Battle of the Bulge, but still a significant part of that, and really rallied to try to keep the morale of those men up, because it was if you listen to any of basically stories from the war, anyone that served at Bastogne, that was the worst part. That was the most miserable, hardest part. You think D-Day or all these other things, but it was Battle of the Bulge, Bastogne.
Yeah. I've listened to a lot of different World War II veterans, and they've all the ones that were at Bastogne, that's the one they bring up, and how just miserable it was. They felt like they were in hell. But
yeah.
So it's interesting too, though, because you bring up all those other companies and obviously soldiers that were there, that fought there at Battle of the Bulge, and are heroes that we don't know about.
Yeah.
I know, reading about Dick Winters, he was actually really reluctant when they were doing Band of Brothers. He didn't want attention from it. Even his book, Beyond Band of Brothers, he was very reluctant to write that, but he just got pressured, and he finally did it. But he didn't want the attention. He didn't want the glory or the fame of being this war hero. And I think that is something that goes back to probably all those guys that fought there. It was a brotherhood, and it was a very, obviously, horrific thing to experience. And it's kind of funny to say it this way, but kind of a sacred experience that you keep with your brothers there.
Yeah.
You don't want it to, you don't want to, yeah, you don't want to, I guess, go and shout it at the world because, you had brothers that didn't make it back from there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you all experience just such horrendous things that you don't want to relive, and I think talking about it is reliving it, right? So I think
Right.
about that. Like, I think about, obviously, this story got out there and got a ton of publicity and notoriety, but how many other men just, even that made it home, like, just, you hear about these vets that just would never talk about the war, and then they died, and their family doesn't know a lot about their time serving because they just didn't talk about it. One, probably they didn't want notoriety or publicity, or, like, I don't think that they believed that they did something so great, right? They just did what they were asked to do and when they were asked to do it. And so,
Yeah.
like, how many of
Well,
these stories are just almost lost? And at this point,
yeah.
there's such a small number of vets from World War II left. I mean, they're going on 100 or 100 plus years old at this point, so it's hard to go back and get these stories now. So I think
Yeah.
I think Easy
Where,
Company and Dick Winters did incredible things, but I don't want to overshadow all of these other stories that are
right.
just not known or lost because they weren't in the limelight. So
And you can understand obviously their point of view, where they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to want to be portrayed as getting all this glory for it and everything.
yeah,
But on the flip side, it's so important that we know about these things, because I think a lot of Americans, especially young Americans, like, they don't fully know or understand what the generations before us went through, so that this country can be what it is today, so that
right,
we can have it so easy and so cushy, you know.
yeah,
So
yeah. It's so easy
and
to
that's a big part of this podcast. We want people to understand the people that came before us and what they went through, so that we could have what we have and the lives that we have.
Yeah, and I think putting in perspective what we do have, right? Because it's so hard where we live the lives that we live, and we haven't known any different from having the freedoms that we have, and living the lives that we have, and having the luxuries and comforts that we have. So it's hard to maybe put in perspective really what that means. So I think part of it is understanding too, though not perfect, like, what America stands for and represents, in that, we are a beacon of light for freedom and for hope, and that everyone has certain unalienable rights, right? Like, everyone has value and can contribute however they choose to contribute, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That's right. And a lot of people don't have that, even in the world today. And so I think sometimes it's hard to, like, we can lose that perspective because, like, you and I, our generation, especially here in America, like, where we've grown up, like, we haven't really known any different. So there's actually a
Right.
quote from, I wanted to read. I have the Winter's book here, but they were a part of. They didn't necessarily liberate a concentration camp. Part of the Dachau camp, um, I guess, like, circuit. Basically, it wasn't the actual Dachau camp, but it was one of its camps that was associated with that, the concentration camp. But they
Yeah.
they came across it. Easy Company, they discovered it. Some of the first ones there, and they didn't really understand what it was when they first came across it. Like, they didn't know
It,
really.
it, had- it had basically been deserted by the
Yeah,
German soldiers,
yeah. The,
right?
the
And so
the
they
war
just
was
stumbled
lost at
upon
this
it with these
point.
people
Germans
here.
just deserted it, but all of the prisoners were still in there. So the name of it, what was it? Coffering? It was a part of a network of satellite camps built to house Jewish slave laborers forced to work on underground military facilities for the Nazis. So it had been, the Nazis had left because war was over. The Allies had basically taken control. So they come across this camp like, whoa, what is this? But Winters says, kind of going back to talking about what we were talking about, like, what really putting this into perspective. So he says, as I went through the war, it was natural to ask myself, why am I here? Why am I putting up with the freezing cold, the constant rain, and the loss of so many comrades? Does anybody care? A soldier faces death on a daily basis, and his life is one of misery and deprivation. He is cold, he suffers from hunger, frequently bordering on starvation. The impact of seeing those people behind that fence left me saying, if only to myself, now I know why I am here. For the first time, I understand what this war is about. So going back to understanding, like, these people should have the same freedoms and rights that we have, and they were stripped from them, and they were treated like animals, and just like they had zero worth and value.
Yeah.
And so that is kind of, to him, as they've gone through everything they've gone through, and still questioning, like, why am I here? Why are we fighting this war? Why are we doing this? But realizing this is why. This is why we're fighting the war, for these people who, this genocide basically, who are not being treated like human beings, who do not have the same rights and freedoms that I have grown up with and I have been blessed to have. So I think, I don't know, for me, like, it puts that in perspective. Like, yeah, America is not perfect and won't be perfect, but I think it, in situations like this, stands as like this beacon of freedom and liberation, right?
It made Winters realize his purpose in being there.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, I couldn't. I mean, we've obviously, I'm sure everybody listening has seen, in school, you saw pictures of, concentration camps and how horrible they were. Even just seeing, the old black and white photos just are sickening. But man, could you imagine, as one of those soldiers, you've just been through hell with D-Day, with Battle of the Bulge, and then you come upon this.
Yeah.
And it's probably, they've seen all these horrific things leading up to that, but I can imagine that this could have been the most horrific thing that they'd seen.
Yeah, I mean,
which is saying a lot.
He talks about that, like, it shook all of them, and they've been pretty battle hardened up to that point, right? And it was just seeing those men that are in the camp that were treated like less than animals,
Yeah. So at this point, the Germans, they basically know the war's lost for them. And so where does Easy Company go from here? I guess how do they end up in Hitler's eagle's nest? How does this all play out?
Yeah, so they go to, I can't say it with the German accent, but Berchtesgaden, basically, which was like Hitler's, where he had his big nice house, and a bunch of the SS guys, that's, the top guys, that's where they lived. It looked over the mountains in Austria, like a beautiful, beautiful place, and that's where Hitler, spent a lot of his time. And for his 50th birthday or something, basically there was the Eagle's Nest was built, which was this palace kind of lodge at the very top of the mountains above Berchtesgaden. So they were there kind of basically running the town, keeping, making sure the war had ended, but, making sure that everything was still good. And they were, I don't know if they were given the mission to go up there, but yeah, they were one of the first companies to go up. They went into the Eagle's Nest, and basically, like, these U.S. soldiers, like, raided it. They just went in there, and you can go up there now. There's like a restaurant in there and all sorts of stuff, but like, these U.S. soldiers carved their names in the mantle above the big fireplace and stole all sorts of stuff, jewelry or silverware, liquor, all sorts of stuff from there. So there's pictures of, you could pull up pictures right now of Winters and Easy Company at the Eagle's Nest hanging out there. Yeah, if you type in Easy Company Eagle's Nest, there's pictures of them hanging out there on the Eagle's Nest. And the war is basically over at this point, so they're just so like Winters is sitting down, and that's out on the balcony at the Eagle's Nest.
Wow.
But they basically went in and like ransacked it and took a bunch of souvenirs, and so there's, I mean,
Well, yeah.
stuff from there. I think one of them took like Hitler's silverware and has his silverware set or his silver. Um, so a lot of cool stuff from there. But yeah, they were one of the first groups to go to the Eagle's Nest, which that would be a cool place to go visit.
Yeah. That would be a sweet place to go visit.
Look it up. What was Hitler's house called in Berchtesgaden? I can't remember what it was called, but it was a super nice house, but it was bombed by the Russians, I think. He came in and bombed it because they didn't know what Nazis were hiding out, or so they just wanted to take it all out.
Is this it?
Yeah, yeah. What's it called? The Führer. Yeah.
The Fuhrer's Forgotten Tea House?
I think it's just the house. So if you scroll down, there's a black and white one, third row down on the right. They're walking up a driveway.
This one?
Yeah, like that was kind of his house.
Okay.
Which now I've like looked up some videos. It's not standing anymore. Like the driveway's kind of there, and the foundations of the house are kind of there. There's like a tunnel that comes in from the other side that's still there, but it was pretty much wiped out. It's like a forest now, covered in trees and stuff. But
Interesting. Okay, so I mean, Easy Company at this point, they kind of one of the first ones to hit their Eagle's Nest, and I mean, what from here? Is it war is over, time to go home? Do they have to stay a while?
Well, they have to stay there. They can't just all leave. And then you got to remember, the war in the Pacific theater is still going on. So the war with Japan, like that's still happening. So they had like a point system based off how much time in combat and some other things you would accumulate points, and it was if you hit a certain amount of points, like 82 points or something, you could go home. But if not, then you'd have to stay there and basically prepare to get deployed to the Pacific.
Wow.
And Winters actually, so he was there, and kind of they just started training. Like, all right, well, we got to train to go to the Pacific.
Yeah.
I think he may have had enough points to go, but he actually decided, well, I'm going to be more use and help. I have all this experience now, like I might as well go fight there. So he tried to transfer and go to the Pacific, and that was denied. So he stayed behind. I'm not sure how long he stayed behind, but he commanded some companies over there and overlooked a lot of basically trying to make sure that thing stays civil and stuff.
But it's not too long after this that Japan surrenders, and we have victory in the Pacific as well.
A lot of them didn't have to end up going to the Pacific because Japan surrendered.
Okay.
So he didn't end up going to the Pacific, but stayed in Europe for quite some time. Kind of, because he was an officer. He talks about how some German officers, much older than him, higher in rank, basically they came and surrendered to him, and one of them gave him his pistol, and Winters talked about how that weapon had never been fired and Winters was never going to fire it, but basically they were surrendering to him. So he talks about how he was like a 25-year-old guy basically in charge, telling them, like collecting all of the weapons of the enemy, and they were surrendering to him, kind of being in charge, and at this point, like being in charge of the town, right? He was the highest rank, and put in charge. So kind of crazy what just the responsibility was put on these guys and what they had to do. But then he talks about too going up in the mountains and going hunting. He got some local guy to take him up sheep hunting high in the mountains, and he ended up falling and almost dying sheep hunting after the war was over on the mountain. So
Wow.
definitely things calmed down as far as combat and stuff goes, but he had some pretty big responsibilities still while he was there. And then he through I think officer candidate school, is that what it was called? He made friends with Nixon. I can't think of his first name right now, but he was an officer as well that served kind
Richard?
of. What's that?
President Richard Nixon? You're talking about
No,
President Nixon? Richard Nixon?
no, he was just a friend.
Oh, no, you're
Winters.
talking about, yeah,
What was his name?
yeah.
But so he came from like a wealthy family that had a kind of company business that they have. But he basically offered Winters like, hey, come work with us. So Winters worked with him for a while, and then
It's Lewis.
Lewis Nixon. And that's an interesting kind of dichotomy, those two as well. Like Winters basically says he was his best friend, and they got along so well, and they had the same perspective on leadership and combat and all of those things. But they were complete opposite people. Like Nixon,
Yeah.
if you watch the series, he's portrayed as like a drunk. He's always drinking, and where Winters is so buttoned up, clean cut. Nixon is the opposite, right. But I think they complement each other so well, and they were able to kind of support each other through the whole war. So Winters ended up going and working for him for a while after he got home from the war.
And then I think his stint working there was not too long. He basically goes back to Pennsylvania, right? And buys a piece of land and kind of lives the rest of his days as a
in peace. I mean, he started his
right?
own company, like a fertilizer company. I think they used like waste from Hershey's, because Hershey's was in Pennsylvania, right? And they made like animal feed and fertilizer and stuff like that. I don't know exactly, but kind of ran his own company and settled down and got married and lived out his days doing that until Band of Brothers was written, and he was involved with that and friends with Stephen Ambrose, and then he was involved in making the series Band of Brothers as well.
Wow.
I actually listened to a podcast too about that. It's actually the guy who helped Winters write Beyond Band of Brothers. What's his name? Colonel Cole C. Kingseed. So he's a 30-year Army veteran. He helped Winters write this book, but he talked about how when the series was written and filmed, Winters watched it and basically told, because it was Steven Spielberg's and Tom Hanks who did it, and he basically told Tom Hanks, like, I don't like it. I don't like how you portrayed me as my character. Like, you portrayed me as like cussing all the time, and like all these, like, I don't like that. That's not who I am. And so they kind of went and redid some things to portray Winters really as he was, just a very disciplined, straight-laced guy. He was pretty concerned or intent on how he was perceived. I think because he lived like such a straight-laced life, and like I said before, I think some pride in who he was and how he lived and the character that he had and the discipline that he had, that he didn't want that to be portrayed.
Yeah, well, if you have morals and values that you live by in your life, you definitely take pride in that. And especially on, a scale like he suddenly was thrown into the public eye.
Yeah.
With Band of Brothers, you want people to perceive you as the way that you were, the pride that you took in, the character that you had and that you upheld throughout your life. So I totally get that. I would have been the same way.
Yeah, for sure. But kind of just back to who he was.
Yeah. So it's crazy because somebody like him, you hear about his story that we just talked about and what he went through and what he lived through. And I mean, for the rest of his life, most of the rest of his life, he dies in 2011. He lives a pretty, seems like, quiet and just humble life, just on his property there in Pennsylvania, which it's crazy that we have people like that you're just walking around in everyday life and we have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
We
Yeah.
have, celebrities, movie stars who people are going to, flock to and freak out that they see. But, walking by some old guy at the grocery store, and you have no idea what he actually did and went through and how much appreciation you actually owe to that person.
Right.
And so, and the real heroes to me are the men like that and women that they don't shout their accomplishments out loud. They just have that mindset of just put their head down and do their job and do it the best they can and get the work done. And I think Dick Winters exemplifies that to a T.
Definitely. Yeah, I think I mean, how long did it take for this story to get told? The end of his life, finally the story was told, and it became a super big story. But how long did it take for that to happen? And like I said, how many stories out there aren't even known? That reminded me of. I remember when I was a kid. I don't know, probably 14 or so years old. Our church had an event where they had all of the veterans kind of put together a display, and you could go, see their display and what they did. And I remember going to it, and I was interested in history, but I didn't really know too much. But I significantly remember these certain two guys that I talked to that served in World War II as bombers, and
Wow.
their stories, and I had known them for super long. I'd gone to church with them for a super long time and had no idea. Just quiet, old, humble guys that didn't think much of. But you hear their story and you're like, oh wow,
Yeah.
dang, you did that. So, and I think that's where my first interest of World War II and understanding these stories and what happened. I look back to, I think that's where kind of the genesis of it, where it started for me. And I still didn't do a whole lot with that. I was interested in it, but starting to learn a lot more about it and just develop a greater appreciation and really what they did and the magnitude of it.
Yeah. Well, kind of to wrap up here, a question I have is, well, it's kind of two questions, I guess. What do you think America would look like if we had more men like Dick Winters? And then the second part is how, especially young men, I mean, how do you think in today's society we, I don't know if this is the right word, but can create young men that are like that lead and have the courage and grit like Dick Winters did? I guess, what do you think needs to change in society?
And that's
Because they're out there. I mean, there's plenty of people out there that you and I both look up to that I think have those qualities, but I think it's becoming fewer and fewer.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I just wanted to see what did you think? How do you think we get people more, young men in particular, to exemplify the leadership style and courage like that?
That's a big question. I think there's a lot of things. I think there's a lot of factors that played into not only Dick Winters, but a lot of the greatest generation, who they were. So you look at the circumstances they grew up in. They grew up in the Great Depression, so they didn't have very much, and they had to learn how to work and to get by at a very young age, right? Life wasn't cush. They weren't given whatever they wanted. They weren't given what they needed sometimes. They had to learn to live and be uncomfortable and do hard things. And then, as they get to adulthood, young adulthood, they got to go serve in this war and do things that I think a lot of our generation would just not be able to do. And I'm no expert on this, and my life has been very easy, and I realize that more and more the more I learn about history. And I think we aren't forced, especially the circumstances we live in, we don't have to do hard things. Our life can be very easy, and so I think it's important to still strive to challenge ourselves, to do difficult things, to stretch ourselves, to be uncomfortable, even if that's intentionally putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, because I think that's what created the character of Dick Winters and a lot of the Greatest Generation is they had to learn to be uncomfortable, and they learned how to work and how to get something done because it needed to be done, not because it was fun or they got something out of it, or like there's a job that needs to be done and I am the person to do it, and they had to step up and do it.
Yeah.
Right? And I just don't think we have that because we don't have to, because life is easy.
Yeah.
And it's easy to get instant gratification, or it's easy to, when something is hard, to procrastinate or to numb it, or to look at, like, oh, I don't want to do that hard thing. I'm just going to scroll on my phone, or I'm just going to turn on Netflix, or right? And like we can just run from these challenges. So I think facing challenges head on and creating, even if we have to create our own challenges and uncomfortable situations, I think that's good, because then when we are called upon, whatever it is, we know we have that confidence in ourselves, like, okay, I can do hard things, I can push myself, I can do things that maybe I thought I couldn't do because I've challenged myself and I've done things in the past. So I don't know if that's kind of a long answer, but if that makes sense.
No,
Those are some things I can think of.
I think it's a great answer.
I think too, one thing, there's a lot of attributes of Dick Winters, I think, that made him who he was, and you highlighted on this a little bit. One is preparation, like taking pride in what you do, no matter what it is, whether it's school or work or family relationships or whatever you do. Take pride in what you do and try to be the best that you can be at that. So at the back of his book, he just has 10 principles for success, and there's a couple of them that stood out to me. So one of them is take a moment of self-reflection, look at yourself in the mirror every night, and ask yourself if you did your best. So whatever we're doing, any day, whatever we're pursuing, every day, just hold yourself accountable. It doesn't have to be perfect, but did I do the best given the circumstances that I could today? I think that's one principle, that if you have pride in what you do, you're going to strive to do that rather than just doing what's easiest or what is good enough, like taking pride in what you do and saying, did I do my best? And then another one was, where is it? True satisfaction comes from getting the job done. The key to a successful leader is to earn respect, not because of rank or position, but because you are a leader of character. So, like, getting the job done, not worrying about who's getting credit. If I'm looking good, does this make me look good? But like, what's the objective, and what's the best way to get that done? And doing that with character, right? Doing it the right way. Rather than making the wrong easy choice, making the hard right choice, doing it the right way. And I think people recognize that and respect that, and you build a credibility of character that over time people will respect more and more, and I think you develop it more yourself. The longer you do that, the more you hold true to yourself, and you take pride in doing things with character.
Absolutely. Well, Dick Winters was an amazing guy. I'm glad you kind of introduced me to him and made me aware of who he was, and I could learn more about him. As you were speaking here, that quote that I'm sure many of us have heard goes something like, hard times create strong men create easy times create weak men create hard times, right? And I think we're kind of in that cycle a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those men, the greatest generation ever, those guys that went and fought over in World War II, those were strong men. Those are strong men that created times that made it so it's pretty good for us. And so I hope that our generation at least can at least step up to the plate, and instead of being the weak link, can be, the strong men, is a JFK quote I love is, "Don't pray for easy lives, pray to be stronger men." I might have gotten a little bit wrong there, but that's the gist of it. So, well, thanks, Bracken, for jumping on and talking about Dick Winters. Go ahead and follow us, leave some comments, or give us a like. We'd appreciate that. But
yeah, and
until then,
let us know if there's anyone else that you want to learn about that we can learn about as well. We're always looking for different people just that exemplify grit. So if you guys have anyone in mind,
grit, patriotism, pro-America. But
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks, Bracken. Appreciate it.
Yep, thanks.
We'll see you.